Taking my seat just in the nick of time. Good evening and welcome everybody to the Suick Seminar Series, episode number 3. This episode is, I'm wearing my special shirt for tonight, made in Canada. This is about catching muskies in Canada. This is the all Canada show. And so let's start off with the 3 top reasons why you might want to come to Canada to fish for muskies in 2025. First of all, wild fish. No matter what you fish for, wild fish or stock fish, both muskies are wonderful to catch and a great experience, but there's a difference between them, and we're all wild muskies up here in Canada, wild fish only. We're going to talk a bit about that today. $1.45. That's the second good reason why you might want to consider coming north this year. I pulled up the exchange, and an American dollar, a real dollar, is worth $1.45 Canadian. So that's right. We have 1/3 off on everything in Canada this year. Hotels, guide services. Gasoline is a little bit more expensive than what you have, but at $1.45 exchange rate, this is the year that you probably want to come up and spend your $1.45. 3,000 miles of muskies from the Manitoba-Ontario border all the way out to the East Coast in New Brunswick, 3,000 miles worth of muskies. So whether you're in the Midwest or you're in the East, we have the muskies here for you and easy access to them. So more muskies in Canada, bigger muskies, wild muskies, and way less pressure. Come to Canada in 2025. We will be happy to host you. So we're going to talk about muskie fishing in Canada today. In the old days, there was muskie fishing. The evolution of muskie fishing started in Northern Ontario for us. The center of the muskie world was Lake of the Woods, Eagle Lake, Lac Seul, Wabigoon, Rowan Lake, Cedar Lake. That was it. That was the promised land. That was all anybody knew. And the people who were most interested in muskie fishing were largely from Illinois. The Chicago area is the heartland of muskie fishing in the States. Minnesota, Wisconsin, and from my days in Northern Ontario, a lot of people from Iowa. So you had a real Midwest crowd chasing Midwest fish in Northern Ontario. But the St. Lawrence River gained popularity in the 50s and 60s, and in the new age, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, people from Pennsylvania, Ohio, New Jersey, and New York really caught on to muskie fishing in the East. And lo and behold, started to discover that they had equally as good, maybe even access to better muskie fishing in the eastern part of North America, in the eastern part of Canada specifically. The St. Lawrence River at Gananoque in Kingston, Lake St. Francis, Lake of Two Mountains, Lac St. Louis, the Ottawa River, the Kawartha Lakes, an amazing eastern fishery developed. So east, west, they're different. They're all muskies, but they're 2 different worlds of fishing. And so we're going to talk about the eastern fishery with our usual team of suspects, Mr. Brent Bochuk, a specialist in the Kawartha district. He's going to put his 2 cents in on a regular basis tonight. I don't know. I see a sign for Brent, but I don't see Brent. We also have Lisa Goodyear in the background. I think she'll step in maybe if we're lucky and tell a story or 2 about Lake St. Francis. And we have Noah Oliveira Hill, who's manning the cameras and the editing tonight. So, hey, Noah, how are you doing?
Good, John.
Good. Thanks. We lost Mr. Bochuk already. That's okay.
Yeah, he's having some technical difficulties right now. So,
okay.
Just trying to get that sorted with him.
Okay, we'll get him back in just a minute. We can do without him for a moment or 2. And we have to talk about the waters of Northern Ontario, a very special guest tonight, Mr. Glenn McDonald from the 54 or Bust podcast. He's been around for 4 years with this podcast, Recently, he started, actually, it's the YouTube channel that's been around for 4 years. Recently, he started a podcast. I think you're 12 or 13 episodes into that, but you've already had Jim Sarek, and you've got Steve Heidig coming up, and Pete Mena on there, and Joe Bucher. And so, like, that's some amazing people to have on your show already, Glenn. His wife also runs a tackle store that's near and dear to my heart. Bobby's Bait Shop in Vermilion Bay. I've been going there for 50 years. Used to save my money up as a kid. So just somebody who's got his finger on the pulse of the North, Mr. Glenn McDonald.
Thank you guys for having me. Really looking forward to this one. And yeah, it's definitely different from east to west in Ontario in Canada. So I'm looking forward to kind of breaking this one down and talking some big muskies on some big waters. Yeah,
lots of differences in the way that we fish. Difference oligotrophic versus a lot more eutrophic waters and mesotrophic waters out here. We'll break those down, the trout waters, traditional waters of Northern Ontario. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. But yeah, lots of great places to talk about today. Nice to see you back, Brent. Everything work out?
Technical difficulties.
Okay. I'm very familiar. I am a technical difficulty, Brent. I am one giant technical difficulty. So
that's why we have Noah and Lisa.
Exactly. So you and I can just talk, because that's more than difficult enough for us. So I wanted to start out with a quick history lesson before we talked about and maybe a little bit on wild fish versus stockfish. And then we'll get into our locations, east versus west. But there's a good history lesson. At the end of the last ice age, 10,000 years ago, all the muskies in the world were in one place. They were in the Gulf of Mexico at the mouth of the Mississippi River. This was the only group of essicads left in the world. In Europe, there are essicads, but only pike in Europe. So all the muskies in the world were at the mouth of the Mississippi in fresh or brackish water. And as the ice age receded, as the glaciers receded north up through North America, the muskies followed what became the Mississippi River up to the Great Lakes. And so the entire spread of the muskellunge is based through the Mississippi, through the Great Lakes system, through the Lake of the Woods system, and through the Ohio system. And so for 10,000 years, this is where wild muskie populations developed and thrived. And then came the Industrial Revolution in the United States, where it was all about making steel and making cars, and people didn't care a lot about rivers going back to the pre-1960s, really. And so in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania, anything related to the Ohio River Basin, muskie populations were wiped out, basically completely wiped out and disappeared. And so we still had the wild populations of the north, but in so many places, muskies had disappeared. And then came the era of stalking. Stalking's been popular in Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania going back to the 1930s, but in the 50s and 60s in the U.S., all related to the Great Lakes and what was going on with the Great Lakes at that time and stalking of salmonids. We began to stalk muskies at never before seen levels. If I tried to count the states today, and I think I got somewhere between 35 and 40 states that muskies are now stocked into. And in places like Pennsylvania and Ohio, I think there's 75 to 80 muskie fisheries in those two locations. About 90% of the muskies in those two states are stocked muskies. I'm very pleased to say that since I've been going down to Pennsylvania years ago, there is actually way more successful natural rehabilitation, natural stocking that's occurring than has ever happened in the past. And so those populations are hopefully transitioning to become wild again. But in the U.S., a lot of the populations are based on stocked muskies, and your north of the border systems are wild muskies. So what's the difference between those two? In Ohio, I remember reading about a 48.5-inch muskie that was grown in 5 years. And so in Canada, that fish is probably 18 years old. Maybe in Northern Ontario, that's a 20-year-old fish. And so if that fish gets taken out of the system in Canada, you can't replace it. In the States, you can put another one in and grow a 48-inch fish in 5 years. And so the difference between wild and stocked is night and day in terms of populations in a system. You can't fix a natural system quickly. You can fix a stock system very quickly. I remember hearing Jim Sarek explain to me about looking for new age muskies or dumb muskies. And those were fish that were 4, 5, 6 years old, where intense stocking programs had started, and you already had 4-footers, and they didn't have a lot of experience. And so, that fishery has a lot of inexperienced fish, has a ton of fish to be caught, and then for whatever reasons, the stocking efforts seem to peter out. The fish get caught and the population dies off again, and then it rises and it ebbs and flows. And so in the States, you guys are able to make and manage fisheries very quickly. In Canada, we don't have the ability to do that. Our philosophy is to manage the genetics in a system, to manage how a system is able to support viable recruitment, to make sure all the conditions are in place for natural reproduction, all natural reproduction to occur. And so one of the other differences a big difference between natural and stock fishermen is the genetics in our systems are the way that they were from when muskie spread out through the Great Lakes system. We didn't stock anything. We stocked very little in Canada. And so those genetics are stronger fish. Those are fish that live longer. Those are fish that fight off disease longer. Those are fish that grew up in a system and became acclimated to the specifics of that system, and therefore were made to thrive in that system. And so that's the difference between the Canadian fisheries and some of, not all, certainly not all of, and some of the American fisheries. And again, regardless of what you catch, catching muskies is friggin' fantastic, whether it's out of a reservoir in Kentucky, which I have done, and I enjoyed catching those fish every bit as much as I did my wild fish. But the one thing I'll say is I have an American say pretty much every week that, man, John, that is the strongest fish I have ever had on. And that's the difference between wild and stock. That is a river fish, first of all, out of the Ottawa River. That is a big fish, a fish that's grown up on a treadmill its whole life because it's in a river, a fish that has bigger tail, bigger fins because it's in a river, and a fish that is genetically diverse and has all of its aptitudes and all of its strength. And so that's the wild fish angle. That's what I was talking about at the start of the show. It's quite a diatribe on history and stocking, but wanted to get that out there. And so that's what we have up here, and I do not take that for granted. I'm very proud to be a Muskie's Canada member, have been for a long time. Brent, you're the vice president of Muskie Canada nationally, and we enhance and we support muskie populations and muskie fisheries. It's a big part of what we do, and that's why it's been well looked after for a long time. Should I give you guys a chance to say something, or?
Sure.
I'll jump in there. because something you said there, John, about the genetics of the fish and the growing periods they take. I had Dr. Sean Landsman on with me a while back on our podcast on our channel, and we talked about the growth of tigers versus natural strain muskies up in northwestern Ontario. And we always thought that tigers grew quicker, which is being proven to be not necessarily true. But with tigers, we get so many recaptures that we're able to see fish grow in real time in front of us. And this year we caught a tiger at 45 and a quarter, 45 and a half. And as soon as I seen the cheek pattern of it, I knew that that fish was caught before. And we had went back in our pictures. We caught it in 2019 at 37 inches, 2020 at 40 inches. And then moving forward to 2024, it was up to 45 inches. So it does take a long time for these natural strain fish to grow. Is that something you see, Brent, down in like the Kawarthas, Nipissing area?
I know in the Kawarthas, it seems like the tigers, I think they do grow a little quicker. They definitely get thicker for sure. Definitely
Absolutely.
get thicker.
Yeah.
And they're very aggressive.
Yes, that's something that we always comment on our channel and through our content is, especially in the fall, if you're sucker rigging up here, if you see some fish on the 2D sonar, the graph, whatever it is, and you get a bite right off the get-go, it's generally a tiger because they are that more aggressive, and they're typically the ones that are going to jump onto a live bait quicker than the regular strain. So I would definitely agree with that, Brent.
Yeah, oh, John's back. He had some technical difficulties.
It's going around, Brent. It's going around. I am a technical difficulty. So did I miss anything good?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're talking about tiger muskies. Where are we starting with our list there, John, for the first one we're going to talk about?
Well, you know, when we came together with this, we came up with the idea for this show. We said, we'll make a top 10 Canadian muskie destinations. That hasn't been done in a little while, and it'll be current. And then 10 went to 12, and we talked to Glenn, and there had to be a couple more on there. And so we kind of got our list out in the east down to 9 without you wanted to mention Niagara as
absolutely.
So we have 6 from the east officially and 6 from the west, but we have 4 honorable mentions, and one is more than an honorable mention. So maybe we'll just say the Niagara Lakes, then that's shared water between Niagara River, right? That's what you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, we'll just touch on that real quick because so the Niagara River there, you have a resident population of fish. Then you also have those fish that are out in Lake Erie all summer that come back into the river in the fall, into places like Buffalo Harbor, for example, and the Niagara River in the fall. So you get those migratory fish, plus you have resident fish there. And there is a little bit of a difference between the two fish. They both grow nice and big, fortunately. But those fish that are out on the lake all summer, when they come back in, they're a little bit stronger, they're a little bit thicker, and more of a trophy fishery in the fall there, for sure.
You tweaked my memory there. You know, there's so much that's missing from up here these days. But you said Buffalo Harbor, and so
yep.
Buffalo Harbor's been an on again, off again fisher. I remember the first time it went crazy, people trolling plows around. It goes back to the early 2000s, but it used to be.
No, John, I started fishing out there in the early 90s.
In the early 90s?
Yeah.
Wow. There were so many big fish caught, and then it was kind of a dead sea. It died off for a lot of years, and then it's really come back strong again, hasn't it?
Yeah. It's starting to come back nicely. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
A little bit of a love-hate relationship with the river, but that's my own issues. But it's still a very good fishery, and especially in the fall when you have those resident fish plus the migratory fish coming in.
Predominantly trolling, right? Almost exclusively a trolling fishery.
When I first started fishing there, it was all trolling. Now guys are doing a lot more casting. A lot of guys are drifting with big tubes and with like bondy baits as well, stuff like that. Anything that you can jig, big pieces of rubber. So a lot of guys are staying in contact with bottom that way. And there's also some guys that I know that cast the open water there with jerk baits and crank baits and are very successful as well.
You know that evolution of forward-facing sonar. Now you can sit out in the deeper water if you're a young hotshot, and and really find open fish to cast on. So yeah, I can see that becoming popular everywhere. Certainly, you're right. Certainly, a fishery we had to mention. We have to mention New Brunswick just before we go on. New Brunswick's a really neat fishery. Wow, we have maps and locations, and so. Oh, what do we have there? New Brunswick or Niagara River?
That looks like the Niagara.
I think that's the Niagara River.
It is.
So
I recognize it.
No, it's not. It's New Brunswick River.
It's New Brunswick. Okay.
The Niagara River looks very similar at the end of the lake there to that. So that's why I thought.
Okay. This New Brunswick fishery, this is really interesting because it's an accidental fishery. The story behind this is that I think it was in the 60s, there was QMNR, Quebec Ministry of Natural Resources, stocking of fish on the south shore of Montreal in a lake that had no chance of these fish getting out. And lo and behold, they went up a creek and they got out and crossed into Vermont and over to New York and over to Maine and into this river system, which borders on Maine and New Brunswick. Muskies are considered an invasive species, and every spring it's very controversial, but they take muskies out that they catch at the dams and kill them. The MNRs do, because they're trying to save what's left of an Atlantic salmon run, which has basically disappeared. And so there's muskie guides. There's some really good muskie fishing. I'll say hello to Marlon Prince if he's watching. There's some famous muskie fly fishing for muskies out there, but there's the controversy that goes along with a group of people that works to kill the muskies. And so a neat new age fishery, and neat how it started. So have to mention New Brunswick. We have to mention the Kawartha Lakes. That's is that your home, Brent?
One of them. Yeah, the Kawartha Lakes definitely is not a place where you're going to go fishing for trophy fish. I have caught 50-inch fish there before, a lot of 48s, 47, 46s. A lot of your fish are going to be between 36 and 40 inches. But the really cool thing about the Kawartha Lakes, it's a very good numbers place. So a lot of people, when I'm guiding for muskie, they're new to muskie fishing. So it's a great place for them to learn. You can take them out. You're going to see fish. You're going to hook fish. You're going to get follows. There's all kinds of things that are going to happen. And if you want to become a better muskie fisherman, you have to see muskies. If you don't see, you can fish, a trophy body of water. But if you don't see any fish, you're not going to learn anything. So a place like the Kawarthas is a really good place to get into. You're going to see fish. You're going to encounter them. You're going to learn.
Great place to go for a family fishing trip. Like you said, not trophy water, but steroid muskies. They're a little bit thinner muskies than a lot of bodies of water, but pound for pound, some of the strongest muskies ever. I have caught 50-inch muskies in a 50 in Pigeon Lake, and the Kawartha Lakes is the only place I've caught more than 10 muskies in a day. Yep. I think done that 4 times on Pigeon Lake in the old days. So just great numbers, really strong fish, really a pretty fishery as well. The Kawartha Lakes, 33 of them interconnected. There's a current through them, a lot of cottages, and there are literally hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans who have generationally owned property there. A lot of people from Ohio and Pennsylvania, 3, 4, 5 generations going back. So huge American population. Yeah, really fun place to fish.
I did have a picture of a 50-inch fish I was going to send Elise a post on here, but as you said, it's a family show, and I had no shirt on that picture, so we held back on it.
Yeah, that's just not fair to Lisa. It's not fair to the rest of us either. Thanks for not processing that, Lisa. Appreciate it. Very good. And before we made Glenn just sit and listen to us talk about all the great fisheries out here, there's a picture of a fish from Kingston, Gananoque. I have to mention this. This didn't make our top 12, and it's an unbelievable story that it doesn't. But Noah, do you have that fish? Oh, you have the fishery, the Kingston Gananoque fishery. Okay, this is where Lake Ontario next down. And so Lisa was going to work. There was a fish with my friend Dave and his wife, a 59.5-inch fish that they were holding. It was from around 2010. And I had that fish up. I've given a lot of muskie presentations lately, but I had that fish up. I pulled it out of an old slide. There it is. And I had a title with this fish that said Gananoque, home of the next world record. Because Dr. John Castleman, one of my 6 or 7 most favorite biologists in the muskie world, John Castleman from Queen's University, said that the most likely place in the world to produce a world record was the Kingston Gananoque section of the St. Lawrence. It had the fastest growing genetics, and the population was right, and it, in his mind, was the #1 place to produce a world record muskie. Fast forward to 2025. I just spoke to the Gananoque chapter of Muskies Canada this past week, and I didn't know what to say to them. I've never talked to a group like that. They haven't had natural reproduction on the upper St. Lawrence for 15 years. The greatest muskie genetics on the planet is no longer self-sustaining. It is sustaining because of Dr. John Farrell at Syracuse University and his incredible work. Nobody knows more about the history of the St. Lawrence biologically than John Farrell. He raises muskie from the original genes in the St. Lawrence, has been since 2017, has found a way to stock muskie fry that are big enough to get past the egg and larva stage, that are big enough to survive predation by gobies. And there is a viable population that will survive. Not the population that it ever was, but stock muskies, like I tried to say earlier, whether you're catching stock muskies or wild muskies, there is absolutely a difference. And it breaks my heart to see the greatest genetics in the world become a stocked fishery, but the stocked fishery is better than no fishery. So formerly the #1 place on this list of 12, the #1 place most likely to catch a world record fish, and now a fully stocked human sustained fishery. So those are honorable mentions that we had from the East, and we should probably let our special guest say something about the amazing fisheries at his end of the world at this point. Thanks for all the listening, Glenn. What do you want to talk about first? I made you put Rowan on this list at 6, right? Wasn't even your idea.
When you suggested it, I didn't totally oppose it. It's not one that is super well known outside of a small community that really knows about that lake. It's not a numbers lake. It's a trophy water. It falls into that deep, clear trout water. You have to be a very patient angler, a very good angler. You have to have really good boat game, and you have to really understand muskies to fish on Rowan. It's not one that I've personally fished, even though it's in my backyard where I live on, like, close to Eagle Lake. Every lake up here is in my backyard. I can't fish them all in the summer. It's on my, bucket list of lakes to hit. And it's one that year after year, we're seeing more people put as that destination to go to. And because of social media, we're seeing more and more fish caught there. So it's definitely worthy of being on this list. I think you could pick 12 lakes in northwestern Ontario that could be on this list, quite frankly. So you do have to draw the line somewhere. So Rowan is definitely one that has piqued a lot of interest.
I used to hang out with Colin McEwen, the new fly fisher. Rest in peace, Colin. He passed away last year. We lost a guy who was such a good man for the fishing community, and he produced National Geographic quality fishing programs and took fly fishing programs to a next level. But in hanging out with Colin, of all the places that he's been, and he has been everywhere and fished for everything, he talked about Rowan Lake as a really special destination in his mind. And the list of people that he named that hung out at the lodge and that fished Rowan was a who's who in not just in the muskie world, but in the fishing world. So it's on my bucket list to make it up there as well. And so, all right, we will take one back in this direction. An eastern fishery, number 6 on the list, I have Lac St. Louis to Quebec City. So Lac St. Louis is the St. Lawrence River in downtown Montreal. And it could be a destination all on its own. However, the St. Lawrence from downtown Montreal all the way to Quebec City does have good muskie populations. And the really neat thing about this section is the further you get away from Montreal, the less known the river is for muskies there. And like Mike Lazarus always says, he's looking for new muskies. He's looking for muskies that haven't seen lures. He's looking for populations of muskies that don't get visited, that people don't go and hunt. And so, you know, I fished down, you had Pete Mena on your show. I have fished down with Pete Mena. I will say in the Trois Rivières section, we were the only boat we did 2 or 3 days down there. We were the only boat that I saw fishing in those areas. And so, you know, that's where you're likely to come across a next world record or a true Goliath, is in a place that doesn't get pressure, that doesn't get visited, you know, where you're going to catch a rogue fish or somebody that just hasn't learned. So Lac St. Louis, downtown Montreal, old Montreal, very historic, very scenic, great fishing there all the way to Quebec City, spot number 6 out here in the east. And so let's pass back to the west, to the promised land of muskies. What do you have for us now, Glenn?
All right. Number 5 here, we have a lake that is making a resurgence in the muskie world. We're seeing guys come up from the States and camp out on this lake all season. And it's because it, for a time, probably was one of the lakes that were considered to have world record capability. And it's none other than a lake that's 20 minutes from me. It's Wabigoon Lake. And I personally have a few friends that have caught legal size fish there. One of my good buddies, Dustin's, that I've fished with, he's got a 54 3/4. Another guy that I know got a 54 a few years ago. I heard reports last year of a 55 or 55.5 caught. I can't confirm that. I know there was a couple really high level anglers that spent a lot of time there last year. And I heard reports of that mid 50s class fish being spotted. So Wabigoon is one of those lakes. It's unlike a lot of the lakes in northwestern Ontario, where it's a lot shallower. It's very dirty, a lot of clay banks on that lake. So you get a really dirty clay stained lake for the most part. And on that map, if you continue further down to what would be the southeast on that map, you go into Norwick Lake, which is quite a bit clearer. So it does give you the ability to fish some different water. But because of the forage basin there, the lake is so fertile. It has trophy bass, trophy walleye, trophy muskies, trophy pike. It's a lake that produces big fish of every species. And it's one I fished a bit, but because of the water clarity, it's a tough lake to fish. And it's one that a lot of people come up to. And it like I said, it's just not a typical northwestern Ontario lake, but it's one that if you're looking for big fish, you have to come to Wabigoon.
That's interesting, especially the way that you've described it as an atypical Northern Ontario lake. So typically you have Canadian shield waters, you have trout lakes, you have oligotrophic waters in the north, as opposed to Rowan Lake, which you just described as a eutrophic lake, a lake with a lot of nutrients in it, a lot of color in the water. And as such, it's a much more fertile lake. It has much more life in general, insect, fish, birds, bigger populations of everything. So contrast those two styles of lakes, if you could, for a second, Glenn.
So to contrast it for people that have never fished primarily the deep, clear trout lakes are the ones that throw most of the Americans or even people from Southern Ontario off when they come up here, because structure looks so different on a lake that's 100 feet deep versus a lake that's only 20 feet deep. And when you have clear or gin clear or even semi-stained water, your visibility is so much more. You can see a bucktail way out on the end of the cast. You can see that fish follow in. It's easy to get spooked. But when you go to a lake like Wabigoon, that the medium depth is only 30 or 40 feet at the, the deeper basins, and a lot of it's, sub 20 feet. And it doesn't have that same makeup of shoreline of big rocky shoreline. It's a lot of clay banks. It's a lot of mud bottom. It's interesting that two lakes feed it that have crystal clear water, but as soon as they mix into Wabigoon, because of that shallow water and because the lake runs primarily east-west and we get a lot of west winds in the summer, that lake stirs up steady. So it's a lake that you have to almost go by feel. And I do know a lot of the guys that fish Wabigoon do really well on dive and rise on a Suick, kind of, what brought us together tonight. And it's the style of lure that it can hang it in a fish's face and a fish can pick it up, because they are not hunting by sight. They're totally going by feel, by the lateral lines, by sound. So it's different in that sense, where you go to a clear lake like Rowan, like Dryberry, like the West Arm of Eagle. Fish can see 20, 30, 40 feet. They know you're there with your boat. There's no hiding from them. So it's polar opposites really from Wabigoon to, say, a lake like Rowan.
Yeah, those clear water trout lakes are probably the toughest water on paper. If you had to pick a destination, that is the toughest one that you can choose to go and chase muskies. You can see the fish from a long way. They can see you. They can see your bait. Spook your fish. You need to be better. You need to time things better almost. And so, interesting. So does Rowan did you say zero visibility? You said the fish are using their lateral lines?
No, that's
Wabigoon.
Wabigoon.
Yeah,
zero?
Wabigoon. On an average day in the summer, Wabigoon probably has maybe 6 inches of visibility. When it's windy, it's probably less. On a couple calm days, you might get a foot visibility. But the times I've fished there, when you're pulling a bucktail over weeds, it's a foot underwater. You're not seeing it. You're seeing the wake of the fish or the movement of the fish in the water. You have no visual reference. Like you hear guys like Herbie talk about being in Canada and you have to have a good game at the boat. On a lake like Wabigoon, it's all about good boatside game. Like if you don't have your figure eights dialed in, and a lot of the water, like you're saying here, John, the clear trout waters, if you get a fish at the boat, you generally get one shot at them. So it's very important to have a really good boat game when you're up here on these lakes.
What a difference between finishing at the side of the boat on clear water and in that dirty water. I think we're blessed on the Ottawa River because we have water that goes from zero visibility after a storm to 6 feet in a best case, but that 3 foot range is ideal. And a lot of the time your guest doesn't see that fish. It's when they see the fish that things go bad. That's when they start thinking about what they should do. And that's the biggest fish they've ever seen. And they bumped the rod on the side of the boat and they got a weed on it. And it all went bad real quick because you just overthink it. And when you're in that dirty water, it's just, whoa, that head just shows up and eats your lure and you scream like a little girl and wow, fish on, but you don't have a chance to see it and you don't have a chance to mess it up, which for somebody who isn't highly experienced is the way that you miss fish for sure. Sure.
Yeah, there's no time for thinking. You just have to react, right?
Yeah.
And the more experience you get, the more you're going to react in a positive way without thinking about it.
Yeah, I just want to jump in there quick, Brent, because I think that's super important. I think something that a lot of inexperienced muskie anglers they struggle with the figure eight, and then something clicks, and all of a sudden they're doing the right mechanics, they're doing the right things, they're starting to get catches. And like you had said with Kawarthas, the only way to get good at muskie fishing is go encounter muskies and get chances. I've had some people up here and some friends and some Americans that come up and they're like, I only want to go to trophy waters. I'll fish all week for one shot. Well, if you mess that one shot up, you're not learning anything. So I do think it's really important to practice, and you got to be on waters where you get chances to practice.
That's a really good point in the learning curve. It's not about catching every muskie. Catching every muskie is special, and catching a 36 or a 40-inch fish out of small water, you feel just as good as when you catch a 50-inch fish out of big water a lot of the time. So.
Well, close.
Okay. Oh, you're right. I made that up. All right. Close. Fair enough. Fish number, big fish water or big water number 5. Lisa gave me a hard time. I put the Ottawa River on there at number 5, and she was saying, we should be up higher than that. And yeah, there's not a lot of difference between 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Maybe when we get up to the top, or there's a couple, we'll touch on their difference. And so, I put the Ottawa River, my home fishery, at number 5. A few years back, I would have had it at number 5 in the East. I think the last time I saw the Americans do a top 10 or top 12 in a publication, they had Ottawa ranked 5th or 6th overall. And just we've had a couple of floods. We've had a lot more pressure than we've had in the old days, and so the fish are getting in it, and the education. And so our numbers aren't quite what they used to be. Our numbers of big fish aren't quite what they used to be. That said, it's still an absolutely amazing fishery with giant fish. Like you were talking about Wabigoon a short while ago. I think there were 7 designated world-class muskie fisheries in Canada. Back when Muskies Canada was looking to raise size limits up to 54 inches back in the 90s. I think that's where that designation that you were talking about with Wabigoon came from initially. And so the Ottawa River was given one of those designations, and that means that not only does the river have all the forage and conditions in place, that the muskies have the genetics to grow a fish of world record proportions, and this was analyzed through Clythrum data. So still one of the greatest fisheries, and what I like about it the most is not very many people. When you go, it's amazing when you go to trophy fisheries in Northern Ontario, there's a lot of people. When you go to Lake of the Woods, there's a lot of people fishing in a lot of the areas. On the Ottawa River, Monday to Friday, for the most part, we have very little pressure. You have your weekend warriors and such, but again, what makes a fishery one of the greatest fisheries? Numbers of fish, size of fish, just being a beautiful place and having it to yourself. Those are special features as well. So let's go back out west.
All right. I think here we have at number 4 out west is a lake that I think in the next 5 to 10 years is going to work its way up these lists. And that's the mighty Lac Seul. It's almost been like a hidden gem in Northwestern Ontario. There's only been a few guides really guiding up there and very few locals fishing it. And what is surprising on this map is that the big section of the lake in the middle of the map and then up to the left on there, there's almost no muskies in that big basin, those 2 big basins. Everything is on the right-hand side of this map in the smaller sections of the lake, the rivers. It's a unique fishery because it is considered a reservoir because there's control dams on the upper northwest side of it. But the muskie fishing is primarily out east, and it's not a numbers lake. It has huge fish in there. Guys like Ben Beatty has been putting up big fish year after year. And the past few years, we're starting to see more and more people venture there. And last year, one of the most viral videos that went around everywhere was John and Ashley Holmstrom from Devoted Outdoors. They had a fish follow in on a walk the dog topwater, I believe it was. And you don't even have to be a musky angler to know that fish was absolutely gigantic, like probably in that 58 plus range. I think those are the numbers we heard. It's the kind of thing that I follow a lot of stuff on social media. That's one of the only things I remember from last summer about going viral. And that's a Lac Seul fish. And that's why people go up there. Again, it's almost an atypical lake in that because it's a reservoir up here, it fishes a little bit different, lots of current, lots of tight river sections, and it has a ton of sand in a lot of those areas. So it fishes different. It's another one I haven't been up there personally. It's on my list of lakes to get to. And it's, from all accounts, it's not an easy lake to learn. You don't go out there on one weekend and learn it all or even get on fish. So it's a really unique fishery compared to the next three I'm going to talk about in Northwestern Ontario. But I do think, John, that we're going to see this one climb these lists in the next couple of years.
Yeah, a 58-inch fish in Northern Ontario is built different than a 58-inch fish in Eastern Ontario. We have longer fish out here, I think, in the St. Lawrence, in the Ottawa River than you guys do. In talking to Gord Pizer and Liam about Lake of the Woods, like there's a lot of 50s, 51s, and 52s out of Lake of the Woods, but those fish are built. They are thick at the tail, and they are a log fish that come to end. And the fish out here are, for the most part, thick end to end too. I mean, we have all the different sizes and all the different shapes, but it's thick end to end in a different way out here. Just doesn't have quite the sustained girth that your Northern Ontario monsters have. So something that's 58, that's that thick, that is truly special. Yes, indeed.
I think Noah will find that video and share it with you guys after this. It could have been one that we could have put up here. I think a lot of our audience had probably seen this fish, but it's one of those fish you see on video, and there's no denying that that's what keeps guys like us going every single day for a chance at, like, that's like a world record capable size and weight of fish that could come out of a lake like Lac Seul. It was just astonishing, the size of it.
Yeah, I know the video that you're talking about, and it is a jaw-dropping video. And you watch it. I had to watch it a few times because how big is that lure? What is that lure?
Yeah.
How long is that tail? How long is that fish then? How wide is that between the fish's eyes? And so, all the questions that you ask when you're very experienced, and the answer is it's big. You can't say for sure it's big. So yeah, sensational video. God, I rated this above the Ottawa River. I'm giving myself crap for this. Number 4 out here in the east, I put Lake St Clair. Man, that's hard to say. It's
a really good, it can be a very good numbers place, right?
It's the greatest numbers fishery on the planet. It is planet Clair. There is nothing like it. That said, it's not the numbers fishery that it was 10 or 15 years ago. I think the production numbers that I hear coming out of there are about half what they used to be, but it is indestructible. It is a place where I used to go to Pittsburgh and I do the Muskie Expo in Pittsburgh every year. It's going back 20, 25 years. And I heard 30 fish my first year and 40. And then a year or two later, I heard 60 or 70. And I think I heard 90 and 100 fish, somebody talking about in a day. And that's because it's a trolling fishery. It's big boats. It's running like 14 lines or 16 or 18 lines, with the party, and really producing numbers of fish. And so that's not musky fishing to a lot of people. It's fish of 10,000 casts. I grew up in northern Ontario, where if you trolled, nobody would drink a beer with you at the bar. You caught your fish casting, or you cheated. And so, and I actually had Spencer Berman, one of the best musky fishermen I met. I fished with him on the Ottawa, and I fished with him on Lake St Clair. I had him on the Musky Monday Seminar Series a couple of years ago, and I said to him, "True or false, Spencer? Fish caught trolling only count as half, and fish caught trolling on Lake St Clair don't count at all." And he thought about it for a second, and his good friend Jason Quindano is all trolling, and so it's their world. Spencer, to his credit, is a caster. He pioneered casting out there, and maybe we're all just jealous at those numbers. Long lining trolling, having a boat that continues to go forward when you have 14 or 16 lines out, that is something really different in the musky world as well. Like there is a mortality rate associated with fishing with 30 pound mono, having the boat continue to go forward, and fighting that fish all the way to the boat. You had 80 or 100 feet out to your planer board and 80 or 100 feet of line back, but that place is indestructible. The numbers of fish have been the most for years and years and years. It's an indestructible fishery. They haven't been able to kill it. They, despite handling, they do the best they can. A lot of the guys have live wells, big live wells on those boats. So they've really upped their game. But yeah, it's a different world. It is Planet Claire.
There is a lot of casting there in the fall, John.
The game has really evolved from 20 and 25 years ago, and there's a lot of people that are casting there now. And if you go to the Thames River, Bell River, there's a heck of a group of people that casts off the rock wall there and catches an incredible amount of 50-inch fish chucking rubber off the wall in the fall. So yeah.
Or for me, you drive 3 hours in your truck to get there, and then you start your motor up and you run it for about 2 minutes to get where you're going to fish, and then you put spot lock on, you stay there all day, and you cast.
Well, and that's the evolution of the fishery. Kudos for you. Catching, casting fish. That's what it's all about. So number 4 out east, Lake St. Clair. Back to the west. What do you got, Glenn?
All right. So my very first casting 50 came on this lake, and this lake's near and dear to our heart. It's probably one of our favorite lakes. It's got numbers. It's got big fish. It's probably one of the most fun fisheries to fish in northwestern Ontario. And I'm talking about Cedar Lake and by extension, the Perrault Lake system. It's connected by a short little river, and that Cedar right there. So those that aren't familiar, the west arm of it is clearish, fairly clear water, a lot deeper. You would think of it as almost trout water like, although there's no trout in there. And then where it starts to do the horseshoe at the top of the center of the map, that gets into like a kind of a green or algae stain water. And then as you go down into that west arm and you make that narrow trek down into the east basin, that turns into more of a classic kind of clay stain / tannic colored water. Guys like Sarek, they make a living on that east basin. A little bit easier to catch fish out there. Lots of big fish in this system. Every year there's fish, not tons of fish, but a lot of fish caught over 50, a lot caught over 48. We caught 48, 49 last year. Just a great fishery. And it's one, back to the point of you got to encounter fish. So many people come to Cedar because of the numbers of fish. The only downside of all the pressure it's been getting and the exposure through all the TV shows, all the content creators, is we do see a lot of pressure there. That would be the negative of a lake like Cedar, but it's probably it's right there in that top destination for a lot of people for northwestern Ontario. So it's one that for people that are making that list for coming to northwestern Ontario, you have to include Cedar in there with these other ones we're talking about.
Yeah, it's been good for a long time. And Jeremy Smith, you mentioned him earlier as somebody you just had on on your podcast show. I think I've seen him do
Yep.
a really great Linder episode on Cedar, and so yeah, well-known fishery. Coming back out east, if we go to number 3 at this end of the country, we go for Lake of Two Mountains, also the Ottawa River, also connected to the St. Lawrence River. It's the section of the Ottawa River before it flows into into the St. Lawrence. And there are rivers that flow north. Montreal is actually an island, so there are channels that actually flow north around Montreal and rejoin the St. Lawrence further downriver. But famous fishery. I talk about Canada as an all wild fish fishery. The Ottawa River had a catastrophe in, I think, about 1950. We had the E.B. Eddy plant in downtown Ottawa had a chemical flood, and they killed everything in the river from Ottawa basically to Montreal. And so there were no dams on the system at that time. To make reparations for the killing of these fish, they had to stock muskies and stock other fish back into the system. And there were only 2 places to get muskies back in that time: the Stony Lake Muskie Hatchery in the Kawartha Lakes. So we had Kawartha strain muskies that were stocked into the Ottawa. And what's the lake on the border between Pennsylvania and New York? Lake. Somebody who's listening to this and smarter than I am. They've been growing muskies there since 1930. An amazing place. And so,
is that Chautauqua?
Chautauqua, yeah. Lake Chautauqua. And so they bought a lot of Chautauqua and a lot of Stony Lake muskies and stocked them into the Ottawa River for years. And Quebec, the QMNR, continued to buy Chautauqua strain muskies years after Ontario stopped stocking, and they stocked Chautauqua strain muskies all around Mont Tremblant, a lot of the smaller lakes up there, and took the rest of the catch that they had and dumped it into Lake of Two Mountains. So for fish that lived for 30 years, they were lake fish and they were in a river system, but it was, for all intents and purposes, big and acted a lot like a lake. And they did really well. So up until the early 90s, that system was stocked. And so they had an incredible natural population of big fish. And they had all these extra fish that were getting dumped in for like 25 years into the system and survived and did really well. So those fish were viable up until about probably 5 or 6 years ago when the last of them died off. And so there were insane amounts of 50s and nobody fishing for them. There were very, very few people out of Montreal that were chasing muskies. Muskies Canada population was small. Just Mike Lazarus and Mark Thorpe. They had it largely all to themselves. No pressure and dumb fish that hadn't been caught, fish that hadn't seen lures. So what a perfect recipe. So turn into the modern day Lake of Two Mountains, still an incredible fishery. Lisa and I go and fish it every year. We've had some great days out of there. I think I have a picture of a 55 and a half, Noah. We have that. It's a guy in a red suit. It was off Lake of Two Mountains from a year or two ago nope. Actually, that would have been a good fish to have up a few moments ago. Yeah, okay, we can go with that. That could have been Lake of Two Mountains. It could also be Lac St. Louis out of downtown Montreal. That fish is huge. Jumbino. That's Mike Lazarus holding it. It was a former live release world record, but the St. Lawrence, either Lake of Two Mountains or Lac St. Louis out of downtown Montreal. Just one of the incredible, big as they come fish from this end of the country. There's a second one with a solo shot of one person in a survival suit holding a fish. If you have that, yeah, that was one from 2 years ago, 3 years ago. It was out with Matt Pigeon on Lake of Two Mountains, right? December, right at the end of the year. A turmoil and chaos theory fish. And so, again, a 47, 48 pound fish, but just as big as they get, and one of the best fisheries, a shot at a world record. So let's go back out for more of the best of the best. What do you got at spot number 2 in your Western amazing Western fishery?
This could have went either way. I think depending on where people come from changes where they want to go to. And for a lot of people, this is 1A and 1B for Northwestern Ontario. I have Lake of the Woods in number 2. It fishes a little bit easier than our number 1. It probably has a little bit better numbers. And because of the Northwest angle, it gives Americans the ability to come up and stay in the U.S. and fish U.S. waters. It's a really unique fishery. It's one that I've fished a fair bit. We used to do the Nestor Falls Muskie Cup every year. We haven't unlocked a lot of it, but it's the kind of lake that you're going to go and you're going to see a lot of fish. And it's a lake that you can typically, when you start to get a pattern going, it's pretty easy to replicate it in each section of the lake. Each section fishes a little different, but if you're fishing, say, Sabascong Bay in the Morrison area on the south, kind of southeast corner of that map, once you start to pattern things out, a big section of the lake will fish very similar. You go into Whitefish Bay around Sioux Narrows, very clear water. You start to pattern that out, lower density, bigger fish. It's a really cool, unique fishery in that it has so many different sections. There's so many success stories from that lake year after year. To your point earlier, John, it's not known as a lake that's going to produce legal size fish. Fewer caught every year. Don't hear very many reports anymore of 54 plus inch fish being caught, but it does have a healthy population of that 48 to 52. And for me, that's what kind of separates it from number 1, but it's a lake that everybody has on their list. Like when you talk Northwestern Ontario, everybody mentions Lake of the Woods.
It's the promised land. It's the godfather of all lakes. I mean, it's a place you have to go before you die. And I think it's going through a renaissance. I'm hearing there was really some worry a few years back, not that long ago, about the rusty crayfish eating all the habitat and all the weeds, and the weed beds were being depleted. And what was this going to do to the populations? But the last several years, I have heard really great stories from Gord Pizer, from Liam Wetter, from Darcy Cox, about catch rates that are as good as they have ever been, just in the past few years. So a renaissance, a comeback, always been one of the greatest muskie fisheries of all time, just continues to be. And that Canadian Shield experience, we have the East. And when you get on the St. Lawrence, you get on Lake St. Clair, there is nothing like it. When you get on the St. Lawrence, most guys are just, it is so big, it is so clear, it is moving so fast. That Canadian Shield muskie experience from Lake of the Woods and the places that you're talking about, again, just different, and really special unto itself. So.
Before you move on, John, I just want to say one quick thing. By extension, Lake of the Woods, and then north of it, the Winnipeg River up towards Montreal, and then there's a lot of the lakes off the English River where it ultimately joins the English River and then goes into Manitoba. That north section of that river, and I know that you're familiar with it, a lot of us see that as an extension of Lake of the Woods, and for good reason. The Winnipeg River has an amazing population of muskies. There's a group of guys from Manitoba right now that are really doing well out there. They're getting a lot of really big fish, a lot of really nice fish, and it goes to what you're saying with these river fish. So I just wanted to mention that it's not just Lake of the Woods. You can look at that Winnipeg River as a real extension of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I cut my teeth, back in the 70s on the Winnipeg River, and Montreal is always near and dear to my heart. So I keep my ear to the ground and I listen to the stories from up there. it's always been a phenomenal fishery and continues to be. And for me, like you said, it's an extension of the Lake of the Woods system. You know, Gord Pizer said Lake of the Woods is called Lake of the Woods, but it's actually like 4 different lake systems itself. And then there's the English and Winnipeg rivers going north as well. So even that 5th one that are all tied together. So absolutely. Let's come back east. Again, we have a 1A, 1B situation. If we look out here, it's a coin toss. I guess we'll go Lake St. Francis as 1B. I was hoping Lisa was going to come on and tell you a great story about sight fishing in Muskie tonight. Are you going to come on, Lisa? Maybe not. So, all right, Lake St. Francis. This goes from Cornwall to Valleyfield. It is west of Montreal on the St. Lawrence. A little ways, probably 40 miles of water, big water, fast water, great numbers of big fish. Probably the best place out here these days to catch a 50-inch fish. I think the hottest musky fishery in the East these days. And so, you know, you're splitting hairs when you go between them all, but yeah, if I had to pick one, that Lake St. Francis section. Lisa had a great experience out there a few years ago. You chicken Lisa in the background, and she sight fished up her first muskie, watched it swim past the boat, cast at it, and went and caught it a few minutes later, casting. Oh, there she is. There she is. I didn't see. You want to tell that story? You got that? Do you have a picture of that fish?
I think I do. Let's see. Here we go. Yeah.
I was trash talking you, and you got that fish with Lawrence Gunther. And what a great person to fish with and hang out with too. So
and Mike Spratt. Like it couldn't have been any better. Two amazing people in the boat. An amazing day. And I love fishing the St. Lawrence. For me, it's learning water. You know, the Ottawa River is home. I'm used to tan and stain water. Not a lot of current. We have some current, but to go down to the St. Lawrence and have heavy current, clear water, more rock, it just puts me out of my comfort zone, and I love that. I love trying something different. So,
what a beautiful fish. What do you think of the pattern on that, Glenn?
Those are amazing. Our closest ones here would be the spotted eagle lake fish or the almost cheetah patterns that we see on fish from like Crow Lake down by Lake of the Woods. And some of those Rowan fish have that really cool spotting. So yeah, those kind of fish like that. I'm jealous of fish like that because I've never had the opportunity to fish down there. And again, those are bucket list things. And it's funny that we talk about bucket list destinations and they're different for everybody. I live where a lot of Americans come to spend their week or their 2 weeks in the summer. And for us, it's just Saturday. We go fishing on Saturday. And for some people, Eagle Lake is a bucket list. And that's where I'm going to go next for number 1 in Northwestern Ontario. It's the one that everybody wants to conquer. It's the one that everybody wants to go to, and they want to do it on their own, or they want to feel what it's like to catch a big fish on waters that so many legendary anglers have fished and heard the stories of those just absolute giants. Probably the biggest fish I've ever seen or one of come on Eagle Lake, and it's one of those mid to upper 50 class fish that, like, for us, I'll only ever see a couple in my life. One of the other ones I seen was actually on Perrault Lake, and another one was on long-legged Stork Lake chain. So they do happen up here, but Eagle Lake has this reputation of kicking out big fish. And most of my big fish have come from Eagle Lake, and it's a lake that I don't know super well. I know it well enough to fish it and produce, but it's a lake of nuance. And when you see and hear guys like Herbie spending decades figuring this out and still not have it dialed, there's little hope for a guy like me to ever get it dialed in. But it's just everywhere you cast on that lake, you have a shot at a fish that could literally break the internet. And it's kind of lost a little bit of its luster the last few years because it didn't kick out those big fish. But last year, people were talking about it because catch numbers were down and guys were starting to see a few of those big fish. And it's those ones that, you know, you go back for, and I know they're out there. It's just, you know, putting the time in and being good when you get your opportunities. So I think Eagle Lake is it has to be number one on, certainly on my half of the country here for muskies, because it's one that just everybody has to go to.
It is a place of renown, a place that's definitely right up there. Lake of the Woods or Eagle, I don't know. Guess you could make arguments both ways.
Yep.
I've heard the muskie world is not that big, and so a lot of my guests have fished with Herbie and fished with a lot of the American guests and been to all the waters that we're talking about. And so I've heard stories of Eagle and Herbie stories for years and years. 2 stories about Eagle that I get from out here. The most common answer is, how did you do on your week at Eagle? And the answer was always 0 or 1. Those were the 2 most common answers. And if it was 1, the fish was over 50. So I always found that amazing. And the other thing that I always heard was, how did you do on Eagle? And 19. You had 19? Man, we had 51, 49, 48, 47. Holy mackerel. 3 days you had 19, you caught 19 fish? Catch them. We didn't catch them. We saw them. And so success is measured by a lot of times like follows, and of enormous numbers of big fish have seen them, but really a place where you have to be on your game, where, you know, the men are separated from the boys' experience from non-experience. And so, yeah.
One quick thing I do want to mention about Eagle is, for years now, it's had no night fishing, which was brought on to save the walleye population initially. But it's been a rule that has been just, it stays in place, even though there's been some pushback from people, especially the muskie community. A lot of the Americans want to come up here and night fish it, which I'm sure we could exploit that night fishing bite, but typically our locals don't fish at night. But that's what makes a lake like Eagle very unique. It doesn't see pressure at night, so big fish are left to do what they do, you know, in those nighttime hours. And a lot of times we never see those fish. And a couple years ago, we started to move some big fish right at sunset. We went back out in the morning before all the camp boats were out, and we managed to get one. We had spotted like a 50-52 the night before, and we caught one the next day that we thought was one of those, but it was a 49.5 on the same spot. So it just led us to believe that those big fish, they only move in for just short periods of time. And during the day, they hang out in those big basins. And because of the protected no night fishing, I think it's protecting that, you know, that strain of fish in that lake. So that's just something that's very unique to that lake alone.
A wise man once told me that big muskies make mistakes under low lake conditions.
I've heard that. We've heard that too. So, all right. We're going to come back to the east for our number 1A. And I guess I'm going to Georgian Bay. I've never, you know, I've been on a few big fish panels. I'm on a big fish panel at the Canadian Muskie Odyssey on March 8th, coming up in Burlington in a few days. And so
this coming Saturday.
This week. Holy mackerel, I should start getting ready. But one of the questions we get asked often is about where the next world record will come from. And I used to answer Castleman's answer, the St. Lawrence. But in the modern day, Georgian Bay, probably because it is so big and so vast and as much pressure as it gets, which is not that much, there are so many areas that just don't see musky lures, that the fish don't get fished for. So the possibility of that one fish, you know, growing big, still being inexperienced, being catchable, is probably more realistic at Georgian Bay. Although there or Francis, 1A, 1B. I don't know. You could take your pick. I'm going to choose Francis because there's more fish, but the biggest one of all time possibly lives in Georgian Bay.
And I don't think Georgian Bay gets as much pressure as it used to. It used to always be Georgian Bay, Georgian Bay, Georgian Bay guys would talk about. But now you have places like you're saying, the St. Lawrence, Francis, the Ottawa River, down our way anyways, in Eastern Ontario. All these places where I hear guys going to, St. Clair. Georgian Bay still gets fish, but I don't think it gets the same pressure that it used to get.
Yeah.
And you see all the big fish that came out of there over the years. The Ken O'Brien fish came Georgian Bay area, right? So
the last two fish in the world officially over 60 pounds were the Ken O'Brien fish at 64.5 pounds in Moon River Basin, 1988, and the Martin Williamson fish. Oh, we just happen to have it. And the Martin Williamson fish at 61 pounds, 8 ounces in 1991. So officially the last two fish over 60 pounds. There's, lots of hearsay, lots of stories, but that's the official stuff. So we've done a really terrific job of totally not involving anybody watching the show tonight. Haven't taken one question. Did we get any good questions that came in, Noah or Lisa?
We had a lot of questions, but you guys had a lot of stuff to cover, so I didn't have time to really come in and throw one up there. But here, Let me look through.
Okay, if there was one that stood out, if you want to throw it
Here's
up.
one that goes to you, John, about your whole thing at the start of the presentation. It's about stock muskies in the States. Do they reproduce?
Stocked muskies can reproduce, but the reason that they're stocked is because the fishery doesn't have the ability for the fish to reproduce and sustain a population. So even in a place where reproduction is very unlikely, there's probably still some successful reproduction that happens. There isn't enough to maintain a viable or a fishable population. So in places like I talked about the Ohio River's been stocked for a lot of years, and I hear of natural reproduction. There's been a lot of cleanup that has gone on. We've gotten better about the way that we look after our water. The Cuyahoga River in Ohio in 1968, when it caught fire for the umpteenth time, was the birth of the Clean Water Act in the United States of America, an act that started cleaning up the water that was defiled so badly through the Industrial Revolution. People didn't care much about the Great Lakes or about the river systems until the 1960s. And there was something about that specific incident, the Cuyahoga River catching fire, and it had caught fire a lot in the past, but there was that happening. There was alewife populations dying on the Great Lakes, and a real environmental movement that caught on. And so, and now take it to the modern day, because there's been focus on cleanup and rehabilitation. We have natural reproduction starting to take place. So not enough to maintain the populations. They need to be supported with stocking, but there's certainly natural reproduction that starts to occur. Imagine that. If you take care of it and rehabilitate it, they come back.
Just one quick thing on that, John, before we wrap up here. Eagle Lake, when they did go to a night fishing ban, the walleye population was dwindling, and the Eagle Lake Conservation Group went out and rebuilt walleye spawning areas, cleaned up a lot of those areas of the lake. And back to the question, it's always about those spawning areas. You need clean areas for the muskies to spawn. That's always seems to be the issue. So you're right. When you do protect your waterways, you can sustain them. And I think over decades, a lot of those U.S. waterways have just not been protected. And that's why a lot of them have to rely on stocking.
Yeah. Yep. Some of them are coming back, Muskies Incorporated, a lot of great people in that organization, a lot of people in all kinds of environmental groups making an effort to rehabilitate. Wild is better than stocked. It is very expensive to maintain a stocked fishery. we could get into funding of programs, and the U.S. Has a huge national fund that every state, every fish gets a piece of. We don't have anything like that up here. And so, just built different. Wild is better. Natural is better. Any muskie's good, but wild and natural is better.
And one other comment kind of on the same topic here. I don't know if you've heard of this or not, or you can answer it, but this guy here, he's heard stories that there were some muskies stocked accidentally in small lakes around St. Sauveur.
Yes, totally true. All around, it goes back to the 1930s initially. There was a priest in the Tremblant area who took it upon himself. This is the story that I heard. Took it upon himself to spread muskies through the lake. So there was a lot around Tremblant, and other fish stocked into the areas that you mentioned as well, Saint Sauveur, Saint Jovite, as well. And so again, there were excess muskies that were purchased by the QMNR, and that were active. And so when, there was always extra fish, and they were looking for places to put them. So, yeah. And some of those places, it's interesting. Some of those places, the fish basically died off, but there's viable populations in a lot of the lakes that were stocked that are just naturally reproducing viable populations today. And so that seeding of those systems created systems that maintain themselves in the modern day. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other questions, but I don't think we have time to answer them all. Although we will go through and respond to as many as we can afterwards.
Absolutely. As we always do, we thank you very much for taking the time to ask us a question. We'll get back to you on that. Glenn, if you had 30 seconds to pump anything you wanted right now, what would you pump?
I would say just go to YouTube, search 54 Bust, go to any podcast site, search 54 Bust, you'll find us. And if you like what we do, just stick around because we got tons of great content from my neck of the woods in Northwestern Ontario.
You got a great list of guests on your podcast right now. Pete Mena, Sarek, Joe Bucher, Jeremy Smith from the Linder Group. Just incredible, really good stuff, and love to see the social media that you're doing. Brent Bochek, if you had 30 seconds to plug anything that you wanted to plug, what would you plug?
If you're in Ontario, we got the Muskie Odyssey coming up this Saturday, March the 8th. Great lineup of speakers coming. We got some guy named John Anderson's going to be our headline speaker. We have Davin Heimbuck and Pete Bosselman doing seminars. We have a science panel. We have a big fish panel, and I'm going to be hosting the seminars. And we have a kid, and my wife's going to be running the kids zone.
That's this Saturday. I should probably work up a presentation for that. Okay.
All right, know how to drive and do it while you're coming down this way.
I'm going to do that. And our next Suick Seminar Series event is the first Monday in April, which is April. I was hoping one of you guys would answer that for me.
April 7th.
April 7th. So Monday, April 7th, and we will have special guest Kyle Friedges.
Yep.
Is that correct? And what do you want to tell us about Kyle?
Kyle's he's out of the Minnesota area, does fishing in the Minnesota area. Also in Ontario, he fishes. Has great YouTube stuff going on right now. A lot of high quality stuff there. Beyond the 8, I believe it's called. It was Cabin Dragon Media or Cabbage Dragon Media. Now it's called Beyond the 8. A lot of very informative stuff there, and we look forward to having Kyle. He's going to be at the Milwaukee Muskie Expo with Suick this weekend, actually.
Minnesota show. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. You're right. Correct. Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, another pro-Western guy, and we'll be pro-Eastern guys. So we will have that discussion all over again next time. That's awesome. Do you have a slide that shows our media, Noah?
Yes, I do. It's part of the outro video. So
okay.
Oh, no, Lisa's got it.
Lisa's got it up there. Thank you very much for hanging out with us, everybody. Thanks a lot, Glenn. Really easy to talk to. Hope we gave people a picture of so many opportunities, whether you're in the East or the West. no matter where you are in the South, you can get to fish real wild Canadian muskies easily and for a very good price in 2025. So hopefully we will see more of our fine American friends. Love the States, love hosting you guys. All the best. And at the Muskie Odyssey this Saturday, and now would be a good time to put up our Muskie Media, where you can find our YouTube channel and any one of a ton of seminars or great videos that we have produced or Mr. Bocek from Fishing NV has produced in the past. Thanks for coming out, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.